Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Today we have a fantastic returning guest who's going to be introduced very, very shortly. Today we're going to be talking about GRC tools, what his opinions on GRC tools are, how they're misused, how they're not used necessarily correctly, and general information around kind of like that whole kind of risk element of utilizing GRC tools. It's something I'm very excited to discuss because risk is an intrinsic aspect of everything that information security people do. And one of the main metrics, in fact, for us to decide where we're going to put our efforts in securing things. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our returning guest. Today, I have the legendary Jack Jones. Jack, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners out there who may have living under a rock and haven't seen your video yet on the fair or the interview with you?
Yeah, sure. So, Jack Jones, been in security and technology for almost 40 years. Been a CISO for 3 different companies, created the fair or factor analysis of information risk model, which is now an industry standard or international standard. I've really been focusing on trying to understand how this risk thing works, how risk works, and how we can better measure and manage it.
Fantastic. So, we obviously, when we were doing some of the other videos, we had a brief off-camera talk, and one of the things that you mentioned, which was quite interesting, and actually something that I'd really kind of wanted to cover, was the subject matter of GRC tooling in this industry. Now, this industry has really kind of been around for quite a while now. I've been in it for 27 years now. You've been in it for longer than I have. And there has been tools in the past that have been kind of billed as GRC. They were very, 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 very basic back in the old days. Yeah. And many of us carried on using sort of like standard spreadsheets and what have you, rather than paying for those tools, because they were, even back then, pretty pricey if you wanted to use them, and they were not that much different from your average Access database or, whatever. It's just kind of with a slightly nicer front end. But as information security has become an important fixture within the business world in the last, definitely in the last 5 years, some would argue maybe sort of like 10 years when it really started to gain momentum, we have seen a bit of an explosion of tools out there. There's been lots of tools coming in from Israel, lots from the States, where obviously you're from, and a few from the UK and Europe as well. Some have kind of grown up and just died off because they weren't particularly popular. There was maybe a problem with them, or they just didn't stick. But we do have a number on the market today. I won't mention who they are, just in case any of us criticise any aspects of them. But they have been around, and the idea behind the GRC tool, if you're kind of a newcomer to information security, is basically a kind of central repository of knowledge for information security. You can lay out your risks there, although I know what's going to happen in 5 minutes' time when we talk to Jack about that. But you can also kind of record your incidents, you can record your asset registers, you can kind of map out your strategies, you can kind of do quite a bit, and they normally come as a very modular kind of concern. So you want to buy the bit that helps you deal with ISO 27001 compliance, not a problem, you purchase that module. If you want to do something around PCI, fine, you can buy that module. You want to do incident response, it's usually another module. They do kind of quite often have a core function, but arguably it kind of gives you a taster as to what those modules actually do to expand that function. It's kind of, here's the basic bit, but if you want the really cool bit, don't worry, we've got you covered, but it'll cost you another 50 grand or 30 grand for per year for that module. I mean, Jack, do you think that's a reasonable introduction to kind of GRC and the tooling and what we're talking about today?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
What are your views on that aspect of tooling in general? What's your feelings about it? I mean, it's been around for a little while. I wouldn't say it's massively mature as some of the other products on the market, things like endpoint security, for instance, which has been around for donkey's years in different forms. But what's your view on the market and GRC and the companies that are currently dealing in that space?
Well, I guess, briefly, I would say that even though the moniker is GRC, it's almost all C with a little bit of G and almost no meaningful R. So as a compliance tool, I think they can be pretty useful and effective. In order to govern a program effectively, you have to have risk as a sort of a foundational component of your overall program. And if that's missing from their technology, then that alone means their ability to be an effective governance tool is pretty hamstrung. So I think without a strong ability to deal with risk, then you'll never be able to really effectively provide a governance capability. So, just by that, I would say, pretty strongly limited to just C in terms of strength of capability, at least.
As an idea, a GRC tool,
Mhm.
what do you want out of one? I mean, you've been a CISO for a number of years. What should it really be in an ideal world? If you could have your perfect GRC tool, what function would it fulfill for you and your team? Because I'm guessing it's not obviously just you. You've got some of the cybersecurity guys who may kind of, need input into it. You'll have people who may be more policy and review of contracts and third-party reviews, may even have your own internal pen testers or, so what does a GRC tool mean to a team and a CISO in an organization? What should it be?
In a perfect world, what would it would have a foundation that focuses on risk, because that's what you're here to do as a professional, as a cybersecurity organization or an operational risk organization. You're here to help the organization manage the frequency and magnitude of loss event scenarios. Those are your risks, right? And so that should be the foundation. Is what do we need from a technology solution perspective to help us more cost effectively manage the frequency and impact of loss event scenarios? That should be the North Star. Is if you have that as your foundation, then compliance becomes sort of one of the elements that supports that objective, right? It defines the expectations that have been defined for your organization, maybe by regulators or auditors. And again, with that North Star of, what are the loss event scenarios we care about and that are material to this organization? And so from a compliance perspective, what do we need to be doing to cost effectively manage those risks? Then if you have those things in place, governance is this oversight, making sure that you're not missing key elements, that you're prioritizing effectively, that you're reporting things in a timely fashion and in meaningful way to the people who need to know, and that things are being followed up on appropriately. So, but again, if you don't have that North Star sort of baked into the product, the rest is not nearly what it needs to be.
So basically, in essence, it's like an orchestra in their testing phase where they're just testing all their musical instruments. It's not producing anything of any worth at that time. It's just a lot of different things making a lot of different noise.
I like that. Yeah. I think that's a really apt analogy.
Well, this is it, because I mean, GRC tools, if they're done right, and if you've got them right, you've got them set up right, and I say right, you're kind of at the mercy quite often with, whatever tool that you've purchased in and what have you. But I think I see it as one of the best ways to kind of pull your information together so there's a greater understanding. And as you mentioned something in what you said, when you're reporting to the top, they want to talk in the world of risk. That's how they talk. That's their language. Because if you go to somebody in the C-suite or a group of the C-suite, if you're not in the C-suite itself, there's a lot more people in our profession now on C-level suites. But if you go and say, "Oh, our website has got some horrible risk to it and horrible vulnerabilities, somebody could take it down," they're just going to look at you and go, and you can see in their minds, they're going, you mentioned something about the website, you mentioned something about something horrible, and you mentioned something about vulnerability. So, and I've heard it before from people as well, well, what is the risk? What are you saying? You're telling us the world is going to end, but you've got to give us something a bit more than that. When you're talking to the CEOs and the C-suites, how do you deal with that? I mean, what I'm trying to do is kind of frame the importance of that data set from that GRC tool. I mean, how do you communicate to the powers that be within the organization?
Yeah, my experience has been, at the end of the day, they care about avoiding those big painful events, loss events, right? The things that land in the newspaper or in front of Congress, or facing high levels of churn with their customer base and that sort of thing, or of course, fines and judgments. But at the end of the day, they care about these loss event scenarios, right? Some outcome, an operational outage may be due to ransomware or extortion of some sort, or both, or a loss of customer information or intellectual property. There are these there's a limited set of outcomes that they don't want to experience on their watch. And those outcomes materialize as these loss event scenarios, right? So ransomware because some phishing attack or something of that nature. And if we again focus on that as sort of our purpose for being, right, to help manage the likelihood and impact of these loss event scenarios. When I communicate to executives, I put it in terms. I have had the conversations with them. What are the loss event scenarios you lose sleep over? Right? What are the things you don't want to occur on your shift? Okay, those are the risks. Those are the loss event scenarios that we're managing and guessing that we're going to focus on. So when I report to you, I'm going to be reporting to you in terms of these loss event scenarios you said you care about. All right, here's where we stand on those in terms of the probability of them occurring and the loss magnitude we would expect to see if it materialized. And that's what they care about, right? What's the likelihood of this thing I don't want to have happen? And if it happens, how painful is it going to be? And what can we do to improve our exposure to that if say the probabilities are uncomfortable for them, right? And that's a conversation they're willing to have all day long. Is again, if you're talking about the things they care about, these loss event scenarios, and you're able to represent it in terms of likelihood and impact, and from there talk about here are the actionable things we can do to improve our position. That's a conversation they're willing to have and that they're interested in having.
Exactly. And the thing about, with GRC tool is it actually allows you to pull out, not only information regarding, because I mean, let's look at FAIR. Some of the things that you look at in FAIR are the countermeasures you have in place that will affect the kind of level of vulnerability that you have. I mean, we've got a whole other video. I suggest if you want to learn about FAIR as methodology, go and have a look at that video, and obviously check out the website related to the FAIR and the FAIR Institute. But with regards to kind of GRC tools, trying to hold all the information in any decent size organization in your head as to what it all comprises of, what your countermeasures are, what effect they're going to have, and so on and so forth is extremely difficult. Now, Jack and I, at one point, you had to do that on things like spreadsheets. I know literally it was spreadsheets. And if you were really good at graphs and stuff, you could kind of represent it on a graph. The thing I like about a GRC tool in the perfect world is it does a lot of that annoying documentational piece for you, and you can get on and just talk about, as Jack has just said, the risks, the options, what you can do to kind of deal with these kinds of things, and so on and so forth. But you're also able to draw upon all the information from the entire team of infosec people, not necessarily what's in the head of that CISO or other infosec professional at the time. Because, I mean, let's face it, nowadays there is so much in infosec that you've got to be concerned about, that you've got to action, that you've got to always kind of be reviewing. I mean, you look at some other functions within a business like finance and so on and so forth. This is where I get murdered by anybody from finance listening in on this. But your kind of activities that you do tend to follow a kind of standardized pattern. You'll have a year end, you'll have your monthly kind of checks and tests to make sure that your profit and loss is being represented correctly on the balance sheets, and so on and so forth. But with security, we work in this really, and this is why I'm in it in the first place, but it's also probably one of the most frightening elements. It adapts and changes so damn quickly compared to other professions, you know, and you've got to keep on top of it. But equally, as I know that you mentioned in some of the stuff that you mentioned about risk in general, you know, you've got to stay on top of it. Old data is important to retain because it can have an impact on your decision making. You know, we have to run on data that we know, but also it does change. So, you know, when you're undertaking sort of risk management, it's not something you just do once and then just go, oh, well, we've done our risk stuff, so, you know, we know all the risks associated with our business. Oh, when did you last do your risk reviews? Oh, we did it, I don't know, 2 years ago. How often do we need to do it? You know, with GRC tools, you can keep on top of stuff, and you can, it's even something simple as set reminders. Oh, you need to review this risk. It was reviewed last 6 months ago. You need to review it again. It's been marked as, you know, a high level. So maybe you're reviewing it monthly or weekly or however often. I mean, is that fair to say?
It is, but I think the missing component, and you know, I'm going to continue to beat this drum.
Go for it. Go for it. That's why you're
here. If an organization has set up their GRC tool, and I believe most of the GRC tools can actually be configured in a way to support this. So I'm going to go back to something you said in the beginning. You know, these tools are great repositories right, for information. But what they tend to be, in my experience, is a junkyard, right? Yeah. So any sort of scary thought or control deficiency or whatever gets dumped into the risk register. Okay. And maybe I'm being too literal, but when I see something labeled risk register, I should expect to see that the things in that register are risks, right? These are loss event scenarios, right? But instead, what I see is this junkyard of just stuff, scary stuff that's been thrown in there, right? Unpatched server, you know, passwords that haven't been changed, access privileges that haven't been changed when people leave, right? These are all control deficiencies. They aren't risks, they're control deficiencies. And that's a fundamentally different thing. And, but if we had a GRC technology that the risk register actually contained, you know, this relatively finite set of actual loss event scenario descriptions, right? And then it also had to register for these deficiencies that have been identified from audits and scans and whatever. If those deficiencies are then associated with those loss event scenarios, we can see which ones map to which. And again, if we've done a good job defining those risks, those loss event scenarios, and knowing which ones matter most to the organization, then that automatically provides a filter on all this crap that gets thrown in
Yeah.
to the junkyard, to know which of that matters, right? And again, I don't see that in any of the products out there, is that differentiation between loss event scenarios, risks, and all the other crap that people sort of think of and label as risks, but that aren't.
Yeah, I've noticed that, because I sometimes, say in my day, my days doing PCI auditing, when somebody didn't do something and it was discovered usually during the audit, somebody hadn't taken an action, they hadn't reviewed something as regularly as they should have, or they completely missed a review of an ASV scan or whatever it may well be, they would put it in the risk register.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but you've got like 15 risks associated with the failing of following a control. That's not necessarily a risk. You might have one risk in there, say failure to follow control or
But
something like that.
That's
not even a risk. But I mean, it could be, for instance, if it was related to, and I am going to go down the compliance route here, failing to meet a compliance obligation and thus getting a fine or losing your status, like PCI, for instance. You have your yearly audit. If you don't do what it says on the tin, failure to meet that PCI obligation is going to incur probably additional cost and, worst case, a breach, which means rather a significant fine. But you don't put every single time, like failed to check this, failed to check that in your risk register. That's in that other part of the GRC section, which is related to compliance or to incident response.
And that's a great example of the noise that I'm talking about. So I guess maybe a simple way to express it is, as a profession, and this is, whether we're talking about GRC products or not, we have a huge signal to noise problem in our profession. We can't focus to save our souls. We can't focus on the things that matter most because we haven't identified them 9 times out of 10. I mean, I go into organizations and I look at their GRC tools and their risk registers, and half the time at least, the risk registers don't contain a single risk. It's all, again, this junk. But they, very often there are 2 required fields for each risk: likelihood and impact.
Yeah.
Right. So they'll say, well, servers, not patched. Likelihood, 100%, because hey,
we never patch.
See an example of it. And impact, well, it could be, the end of the universe, right? So automatically that gets, this elevation into a status of critical or whatnot, without any consideration of whether, first of all, that isn't a risk. It isn't a loss event scenario. So something else I'll point out that seems to be missing generally in sort of our profession's understanding of what we're here to do, and that is, again, we're here to manage loss event scenarios, their likelihood and impact. And if you take something like, a bad password or a misconfigured server, and you call that a risk, and you assign a likelihood and impact to that, that likelihood and impact rating will never stand up. It's nonsense, but it's noise. It generates tremendous amount of noise that the organization then has to, they don't obviously understand that it's a problem, because if they did, they wouldn't have it, in their risk register that way. But they're trying to manage this junkyard as if it's the, as if it represents the things that really matter. And certainly somewhere in there are things that really matter, but we can't differentiate them from the rest because there's just so much noise. So one of the services colleagues of mine have performed at a number of organizations is what we refer to as a risk register reconciliation, where we go in and we go through the risk register and pull out the stuff that aren't risks, which again is the vast majority of the stuff in there, and then help them define what their loss event scenarios are that they really care about. So they populate the risk register with risks and then begin to associate the controlled efficiencies and whatnot to those risks so that they can better understand the condition of those risks, again, the likelihood and impact, as well as which of these things in the junkyard really matter. And it's the organizations that have been through that have had a dramatically different experience from a risk management and governance perspective, and even compliance, because if you have that foundation as a starting point, the compliance things that you have to deal with, right? They are all of the same importance, right? Everything in the compliance checklist doesn't matter the same. Some matter more. And again, if you've mapped them to your risks, then you have an automatic sort of filtering effect there. And you're in a much better position to have conversations with auditors and regulators about why you're focusing on one thing versus another. Right? It becomes much less a sort of, well, I'm the CISO here, and I've got 20 years of experience. So, or very commonly, well, I can't do it all because the executives won't give me the money, right, to do everything. Well, they shouldn't give you the money to do everything. I'm sorry, but they've got other things they have to spend money on. So, yeah, it's until we get this sort of cornerstone nailed down of we're here to manage loss event scenarios, period. And end of, drop the mic. Because everything else begins to make a lot more sense once we've got that nailed down.
Absolutely. And again, this is where GRC should be, one of your best friend tools for doing this.
Absolutely.
Because you can, trying to map assets and compliance and all the different component parts of an information security stratagem, infrastructure, managed environment, especially now we've got a billion third parties to chuck into the mix. I mean, the good old days, you ran your own computer center or data centers or computer rooms or whatever, and you could, you didn't have cloud back then. It was all done on premise. So all your risks associated with usually on premise or slightly off premise issues, things like power and light and stuff, you always got that kind of problem. But it was a lot easier back then, and you could kind of do it on a spreadsheet. Now it's a hell of a lot harder. It's almost impossible to map your security cloud, as dare I say it, or your security, sort of scene with all the different connections that we have and the different problems that we have. Third-party risks have probably, in my opinion, been some of the more difficult risks to deal with in recent times, because you're not dealing with your kit. You're reliant on your contract with that organization and that agreement. And a bit of compliance as well. If they're helping you, for instance, process card information, going back to PCI, they better have that certification for PCI. But that doesn't mean they don't have risks, and it doesn't mean their risks aren't going to have a knock-on to yours. And this is where GRC is great, because the tools could do that. And I think in some cases they kind of do, but they're just missing out. I don't know whether the people designing this are actually bringing on board different CISOs from different types of environments, rather than just one. You always hear that, we brought on a CISO who kind of helped us create this tool. And I look at them and go, well, did you speak to a group of them? Did you kind of go out to, say, 10? Because one CISO's experience in this game is going to be really, really different from somebody else's. And we can't know it all.
And I would, and this might get me in hot water with some of you. So let me begin by saying this is a little bit overstated, but I think it will get the point across. So if you asked a physician from the 1700s to, define a better, medical tool or technology, you would end up doing better bloodletting, right? All right. one of the problems is when organizations bring in 1 or even 10 CISOs very often, is these are CISOs who know security and they know squat about risk, right? Our profession, by and large, even a lot of people with years and years of experience don't understand risk. They understand security controls and blah blah blah, but they don't have this foundation of knowing the difference between a loss event scenario being a risk versus a unpatched server. They think that's a risk. No, it's not. If that's sort of your level of understanding, you can bring 100 of those people into a GRC product effort, and you're going to get crap. All right. So until the GRC vendors themselves get a clue about risk, all right, they're never going to hit the mark. Never. All right. They will be nibbling at the edges. They will provide value in one way or another, but they will never hit the mark. Again, that cornerstone, that foundation of risk is central to our purpose as a profession. And until we as a profession and the vendors that support us understand that, really understand that, we're going to be hamstrung. And you can have the slickest UI in the world. You can gather all the great telemetry from all the security products in the world. But if you're missing that foundation, it's noise, just a crap ton of noise. So I probably pissed off half the people.
Oh, don't worry about it. At the end of the day, we've got to have these conversations. This is why we started this podcast. This is why we do this. People. I want people to hear the different sides of the fence and to have thought-provoking things. And you're absolutely right. The cornerstone of everything we do is risk. Now, moving on swiftly away from sort of like the GRC tool itself, because we could talk all day long about this, but we've only got like a 45-minute, 50-minute window. Obviously, you're over in another part of the world from myself. I'm based in sort of UK and Europe, and you're based over in the States. I want to talk about the cost of GRC tools. Now, I don't know what it's like for you guys over there, but the cost over here is bordering on insanity.
Yeah.
Before I quiz you on what it's like over there, one of the horrible tactics I've seen vendors doing over in this neck of the woods, and I want to see whether it's the same over your side, is they tend to sell your first year of access to the GRC tool, the modular GRC tool, I might add, for relatively cheap. And sometimes they'll allow it to go through to the second year as well. And sometimes a third year if you buy a 3-year deal, because they want to get you on the hook.
Yeah.
But they know that once you've been using your GRC tool for, say, a year or for any decent length of time, it's almost impossible to get all the information that you've plugged into this thing out and the reliance that you have on this. So I see the vendors then go from being relatively reasonably priced to renewal time, where I've seen anything up to 200% increases in renewal costs. Now, is that something you've seen over there? Is that a practice that's coming over here from the States because that's the way it's been done over there? What's your view when it comes to the costing and how it kind of works over your side of the pond?
Yeah, well, I don't know if we over here in the United States invented that approach. It wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, I see that here as well. And to your point, the cost of implementing a GRC, at least in large organizations, you have the cost of the technology, but then you very often have to engage a third party of some sort, maybe the vendor, maybe a big four consulting firm or whatever, to come in and provide a services engagement, very often a very lengthy service engagement to implement it. And my experience, I've been the 3 organizations I was a CISO for, all 3 organizations had a GRC product. All 3 organizations spent more money on the services to implement it than they did on the product by a lot, right? By a lot. And I will say, my experience of the quality of those services, again, in terms of the people who are implementing, they know the technology they're implementing, right? They know the tool. They don't, again, they don't understand risk. They don't even understand, I think, how to help organizations do this even remotely well. So organizations pay the cost of the technology, then they invest in services engagements that sometimes run for years. And do you think they're going to change afterwards? To your point, they're stuck.
Yeah.
You're kind of held hostage.
Yeah.
If I thought the technologies actually provided anywhere near the value that their potential is, then I would honestly, if the GRC products and their implementations were actually doing the job they're intended to do, they should cost a lot of money because they would be providing a ton of value. But they're noise generating, resource sucking, part of our, our programs that we're paying way too much money for, given, in my view, really limited value we get from them. So yeah, I was never happy as a GRC, because, and it wasn't my choice to bring these in, and they were set up in two cases before I landed. So I had no influence on how they were implemented or anything like that. But I got to see how little value we got, how much time and effort, just the amount of time and effort organizations put into actually using and managing these tools, let alone, again, the upfront cost of implementation and services. It's a real resource sink. And again, we don't get anywhere near the value that we should for the money we're paying.
It's interesting that, actually, because over here, we rarely have. We don't have many companies that, by any stretch of imagination, as big as you guys do over your side. Obviously, there's a lot of large organizations originating from the States that come over to the UK and open up branches and stuff, and we get involved in a lot of those. But when you're dealing with kind of like the core corporate office, the big office, we get people who buy their tools. They'll have 2 to 3 weeks worth of training on their tools, and then they kind of look after it themselves over here. But obviously, the larger the organization, the more they need a services company to come in and help them. And of course, the services company is normally somebody associated with the actual vendor, who no doubt is getting some kind of kickback, because let's face it, that's kind of the thing that happens here. So everybody wins. The vendor gets to sell their product, their official integrator or services company then get to kind of help manage that, either on an ongoing or an initial basis. But just the cost of the GRC solutions themselves are budget busting over here. It's like, we're not well known in the UK for having great information security budgets. That is starting to change. But a good GRC tool is basically going to completely wipe you out from doing anything else. And it's like, okay, so I've now bought my GRC tool. Great. I can't do anything else, though. And okay, there's a bit of, does cybersecurity rest with kind of like IT versus kind of like the infosec department? Obviously, when it comes to firewalls and stuff, that's one thing. But when it comes to penetration testing, you don't want the IT team designating the scope of your pen test in an organization, because they're kind of marking their own homework at that point. You want the infosec department saying, right, we're going to pen test the IT environment, and these are the conditions. Do you agree? Okay, you do or don't. Doesn't matter. They're going to be done anyway, because we've got to do the relevant testing to provide adequate information back into our GRC tool that will help us with our risk determination and also help us meet our strategy and obligations and policy requirements and compliance requirements as well. But the cost is insane, and in some cases that renewal, and that's the one that I really thought was bad. The company couldn't afford it. I think I heard on the grapevine of somebody who paid about, I think it was £80,000 or £90,000 for this product, and then the renewal came round, I think 3 years in, and it was 1.5 million on renew. And it's like trying to speak to the C-suite and say, yeah, that tool that we've been running for the past couple of years that was like 50 grand, 100 grand. It's now like $1 million or 1.5. They're going to laugh you out of the room.
Yeah.
Justify the price increase. I'm not justifying it. The vendor is justifying it. So there's a risk. There's a risk right there in your GRC tool for your own risk register.
Lots of scenario defined as have to terminate the use of their GRC tool. Inability to
pay for the renewal of the GRC tool. I could see that probability factor being pretty high for some of the current vendors on the market. I'll be honest. I mean, we're kind of coming into the end point, though. I mean, do you think GRC solutions are important? If we can get it right, if we can get that risk piece as the cornerstone, would you consider GRC as almost imperative for any decent company of any decent size to be able to track what they're doing around infosec?
100%. If it was done well, 100%. Because as you said, the landscape is, our problem space is really complex and dynamic. There's a ton of information. We have to have some way to gather that information and synthesize it so that we get meaningful insights about our problem space out, so that we again can more cost effectively manage our situation. And if we were able to actually do that, if we had a GRC solution that was actually providing that value for us, the cost efficiencies I would expect an organization to gain would mean they can spend more money on, improving different dimensions of their security program and whatnot. But again, until we get it right, we're just gathering noise, generating noise, and spending a lot of money doing it.
I totally agree. And you know what? Once Razor's Edge is doing its thing, it's already doing its thing nicely. We got a continuous, continuous pen testing product. I'm honestly thinking about going down the GRC route, and we can put our heads together and feasibly create this. Because let's face it, if we can create a GRC tool that does what it says on the tin, deals with situation and price it reasonably without trying to drag people over the coals, then we could sell that thing all day long by the sounds of it. I mean, especially over in your neck of the woods, where it takes you a big consultancy 3 years to implement and run the tool. Jeez, that fills me with dread and possibly another avenue for business. I'll be honest.
Yeah, well, happy to brainstorm with you on that. I think it's something our market really needs, is a technology that has the right foundation, and is built from that, rather than something that's cobbled in as another module, right? And that isn't really integrated, and that isn't sort of the focal point. So yeah, it would be fun to brainstorm about that.
So last final question before we finish up. Not mentioning any particular vendors, because we're vendor agnostic here on this channel. Are we getting close at all in any of the products that you've seen? Is there, or are we so far from the goalpost of what we've laid out, sort of risk-based and so on and so forth? Or are we just standing in the dark screaming at the moment. I mean, how close are we to it?
No, I'm not familiar with every GRC technology out there, but I've been exposed to quite a number of them, and I have yet to see any of them anywhere near the mark. Again, they cobble risk in, and generally, in vast majority of cases, they don't again, they don't even understand what risk is. What does a risk, loss event scenario, how do you define that? Where does that fit into their tools and technologies? They're missing that. So, as they're great repositories of information, they're junkyards mostly, and noise generating. So, yeah, I would say, again, there may be exceptions I'm not aware of, but
there
I
you
haven't
go.
seen
So if
anything
you're a
even close.
GRC vendor or a prospective GRC vendor looking to get into the market, Jack Jones is available for consultancy, obviously, and me as well. Don't forget me. But yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you. I think there's stuff out there that kind of works. Is it coherent? Not really. Is it overly complicated? Oh God, yeah. Is it overly expensive? Significantly, especially the ones that are very modular. They can rack up quick. Those modules can,
Yeah.
Okay, Jack. Well, absolute pleasure to talk to you again, especially on the subject matter of GRC. I think what we're probably going to start doing as a new sort of function of the podcast, I do want to return to technologies like encryption and a few other kind of choicey pieces of technology that I think we need to kind of review. And I'll pull in guests. Maybe Jack will be back. Maybe other people will come on board who can we can really kind of look at where the market is in this kind of thing. Because, things like encryption, for instance, I haven't seen much about that in a long time, what the advances are and so on and so forth. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, what is out there. On just say that level, let alone some of the other stuff. So I think we're going to do a set of segments on different technologies and where we currently sit. And Jack, you may be asked if you wish to come back and provide some wisdom. You are in a part of the world where a lot of this innovation is occurring, and we don't tend to see it for a little while before it comes over here. So your insight is always welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we'll see how your audience reacts to some of what I said today. You might want me back. I don't know. So,
I doubt there'll be pitchforks and burning brands, but you may just find a lot of people might be agreeing with you. You'll be surprised.
yeah, maybe.
And thank you for listening or even watching the latest edition of Razorwire. It's always good to get feedback. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us via LinkedIn or through our website, www.razorthorn.com. If you feel that there's something that we should cover maybe a little bit more in depth, a new topic, or something of interest to you or the community at large, we'll even do interviews. If you've got any recommendations or you want us to interview people, we'll reach out to those individuals and see if we can get them on camera so we can ask them the important questions about infosec. So it'd be great to see what your feedback is. In addition, I do have a book recently come out, the Cyber Sentinels Handbook, a primer for information security professionals. Now, this book is very much geared up towards professionals at all levels of their career, be they starters, be they newcomers, be they people who've been in it for a little while and maybe looking for a little bit more direction, albeit the older ones looking to maybe reground themselves in some of the more important aspects of the trade that maybe they've forgotten over time. I've had lots of good feedback from a lot of different readers of a lot of different levels, so please feel free to get yourselves a copy. We've got the e-copy, we've also got the paperback copy, and if you don't want to spend any money, you can go on Kindle Unlimited and read the book for free there as well. So thank you ever so much again. Look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon.